I've long struggled with the death penalty. Whenever I hear a scriptural defense of the death penalty, it's Old Testament verses. My issue is that we don't condone the stoning of those who commit adultery or cutting off the hands of those who steal. Can you help me understand this issue with Scripture? You know, as you look even just at the Old Testament, we're going to go to the New Testament, but let's just think about the Old Testament for a moment. The Old Testament does indeed call for the death penalty for certain offenses, but what's most important, and this is really crucial, what's most important is that the death penalty for premeditated murder is what is drilled deeply into the logic of Scripture. And right in the Noahic covenant, in the covenant that God made with humanity through Noah. As you look at Genesis 9, there God tells Noah that the death penalty for premeditated murder is right and necessary, because the one who would seek to slay the image of God in man forfeits his own life. And that's a tough logic, but I think we can understand it, and it's coming on a very important biblical authority here. This is a part of the covenantal history of the biblical faith. It's not just a part of the Old Testament law. It's a part of that covenantal reality, and of course it is picked up in the New Testament, in particular in Romans chapter 13, where in speaking of the responsibility of government, Paul writes that the government does not bear the power of the sword in vain. The power of the sword is the death penalty. That's just what's being referred to there, and I think we can understand that. This means that the death penalty, as we think of it biblically, should be applied for only the rarest and most egregious of crimes. And premeditated murder is at the very top of that list. The death penalty should be applied with equity. And cause and effect should be a part of the context here, which is the point God makes in Genesis chapter 9. And when you look at the United States, we have a really bad record of equity when it comes to the death penalty. Over the last century, it's very, very difficult for any wealthy white person to ever actually be executed by the state. It's not impossible, but it's extremely rare because given our court system, you can afford the kind of forensic evidence and the kind of legal support that will just make it almost impossible to get a death penalty conviction or the death penalty carried out. If you're poor and minority, and in particular African American, you're much more in danger of being executed. And Christians should never celebrate the death penalty. There's sometimes in our political order a certain kind of facile, superficial, almost celebration of the death penalty. You know, the Bible doesn't say that punishment is never about retribution. It just makes very clear that's not the ultimate issue. And we are to take no pleasure in any kind of retribution. That doesn't mean that we don't, as a society and as individuals, take some moral satisfaction in justice rightly applied. That's actually what we should demand and expect. It's a heavy question. It's a good question for Christians to discuss. And one of the first things we have to do is kind of peel the onion and make sure we're actually talking about the death penalty and not the death penalty wrongly applied. There was an article published by a major conservative in the United States suggesting that the reason the death penalty should be eradicated is because we as human beings are fallible. We can make mistakes. And you know, that's absolutely true. As human beings are very fallible. That's why the evidentiary standard in the Old Testament for the death penalty was so high, right down to witnesses that were required, multiple witnesses, in order for the death penalty to be carried out. And so we should expect our justice system to have every safeguard possible, but not as a way of avoiding justice, but of making sure we get justice right.